we've really come to the early conclusion that we can't do this work well, define competencies, help develop skills and capacity around them, without having meaningful performance tasks for students. What we keep hearing from industry is you learn, develop, apply, practice, and perfect these skills in context. And so we are increasingly working in that space and increasingly identifying our own learning gaps and learning goals. And so I'm really excited to have basically 3 forerunners, I guess I'd say, in that space with us. All the way at the end here, we have Brian Kind, who is the Vice President of Programs for Project Lead the Way. Many of you folks know that. That great organization. It feels like you guys kind of snuck up on the world. Started off really small and quiet, and now I've been in multiple districts. We've been thrilled to have Project Lead the Way as a partner, really helping us advance hands-on, minds-on thinking, particularly in math and science areas, but I know expanding that, I think, even more explicitly about some of these career competencies. So really pleased to have Brian here. He's also a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He's a former tech and engineering teacher in Wisconsin, so if Kettle Moraine is in the room, here's a favorite son at some point, and also in Milwaukee and elsewhere. Oh, you switched order on me. Then we've got Matthew Dodge in between, who is working with the Denver Schools in Innovation and Design.
Sustainable design.
Sustainable design. I wanted to make you say that. Incredible educator, lifelong educator as well, correct? Doing some really interesting things in the field there. And right here from Chattanooga, Tennessee, our leader of STEM high school there, engineering background, and this is a school we talk about in Tennessee. We're talking about nationally as well. Really excited to have Tony Donen with us. So that's our panel. What I'd like to do is have Brian start us off with a little framing around Project Lead the Way in just a second. But I think people are often in different places of understanding when it comes to project-based learning. And so just wanted to share, as a starter in that space, or sort of I'd say a novice, I've been quite fond of the Buck Institute materials as a way of sort of getting a frame and getting common language around this. And really thinking through what are kind of key design principles, or what's our goals when we try and do this. And I think to help everybody else think about it, because we tend to think as long as there's an activity or a project, that makes it project-based learning. And he was like, no. Or if young people's hands are on in some way, that makes it. And so I love these as a set of gold standard principles that when we're designing tasks, first off, that it's not just about tasks, but rather an entire sort of unit of learning. And that's deliberate. So this is already a shift away from an assessment of learning at the end to assessments, tasks, activities to support learning throughout. And that requires us to be really clear about key knowledge, understandings, and I love this, success skills. So again, we've tended to focus on particular content areas. Now thinking about the skills that would be involved in that, certainly collaboration, communication. I also think there's a place for character development, really learning to value other opinions, become good citizens in the way you become good colleagues. So the key knowledge, understanding success skills, a challenging problem or question. And I think this tends to be the hardest part for educators to figure out because we, again, get stuck in our old idea of projects, which tend to be dioramas, brochures, a speech, or a research paper. Does that sound familiar? The third is sustained inquiry, right? So you have a challenging, complex question, and you spend real time digging into it. And generally speaking, there is not a right answer. That can be really uncomfortable for educators, particularly in a testing environment where we believe there's always an answer and our kids can make sure they know it. Authenticity. And I think, particularly for all of us, thinking about authenticity in terms of careers and professions. Is this task similar to what it might be in some way if I were a real-world professional? Student voice and choice. This is a really hard one for folks because it means letting go of control for educators sometimes. And helping students develop the skills to make choices and sometimes make those choices with other people. Reflection, which is not something that just happens at the end, but throughout. And helping students develop that reflective lens to even have a clarity about their own goals, their own learning, and how they're progressing. Critique and revision. And I think our students struggle with critique, as well as revision. And then public product. And again, this is where I think for a lot of us, public product meant standing up public in front of our classroom, as opposed to really thinking about the ways one might engage the community, industry, and others in learning from our students, in assessing and providing feedback to our students and the like. So that's my 50,000-foot picture of project-based learning, courtesy of the Buck Institute. But I think Project Lead the Way has certainly been the leader in thinking about really concrete ways of doing this with particular or explicit content goals as well. So, Brian?
Thank you, Heidi. I think we probably could end the panel on that. I feel like that was a great...
Are we done? We can all have a cookie and go home?
That was definitely a great overview of project-based learning. I do want to go ahead and provide some context to the organization that I'm excited to be representing today, which is Project Lead the Way. I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with Project Lead the Way. Show of hands, there's a few teachers in the room. Ooh, a few folks, which is great.
So now we can say PLTW and save ourselves.
We can say PLTW. Those that are familiar with PLTW know we love acronyms. There's lots of acronyms. We do that to confuse folks. But I do want to kind of give a quick brief history of the organization just to provide some perspective of where we've come from. I'd like to go ahead and kind of describe us as a learning organization, really founded by educators. That's what I am. I've been with PLTW now for about 9 years. Before that, as Heidi had mentioned, was a classroom teacher. Really, that's what the organization is based on. We really found ourselves in an interesting kind of opportunity. Back in the late 90s, CTE was kind of this thing that was kind of going from vocational education to more technical education. And we really went ahead and created some curriculum that was fitting into that high school space. So we really found ourselves an organization growing up in high school CTE, very similar to what you'd see at a lot of high schools. They had a drafting course. And what high school drafting looked like back in the days was draw this water cup, right? Like go ahead and draw this glass, repeat, not ever understanding why. What is the purpose of this cup? How do we have conversations about the practicality of it? So we really started to create curriculum around that and found that it took off. And as Heidi mentioned, we kind of snuck up. In the last 5 years, we've expanded greatly. If you take a look at some real quick statistics here, wanted to show you where we are just to provide some context to what our organization does. We're roughly in about 10,000 schools across the United States. We have roughly 13,000 programs. We've trained 55,000 teachers in the last 20 years, which is amazing. And as of this year, we're actively engaging with roughly 2.5 million students, and that number continues to grow, and that's on an annual basis. So the reach is out there, and by doing that, and I think it's something that's been echoed all throughout the conference that I've observed today, is we kept asking ourselves, so I started the presentation with we were really grounded in CTE, and we were grounded at the high school level. And it was really grounded in the traditional CTE, kind of manufacturing, drafting, things like that. And by having those conversations and creating curriculum and really creating, at that time, what we kind of called our project-based curriculum, it was kind of this unknown entity out there, we realized that we could align ourselves to other career pathways, which was really exciting. So the organization went ahead and expanded itself to hit biomedical science as well as computer science. And we started to look at it and go, you know, we're having this pipeline issue. And really when our students started to make decisions about our courses as well as about careers, so after thinking about that for maybe an hour, I think the decision was we need to go downstream, right? And it's really a pipeline. And how do you influence that pipeline? And I know this conversation, this panel is really about the instructional practice. It's important for everyone in this room to understand that PLTW's instructional philosophy is the same from pre-K to 12th grade. So we use the same model. So if you look at the graph up here, or the infographic, we have high school programs which roughly have just about 16 course offerings that run all year long. We have 10 course offerings at the middle school. And at the elementary level, we start in the 4-5 space and go all the way up to 5th grade with 40 hours of content per grade. Regardless if I take a computer science kindergarten course or I take a look at our high school capstone course, the instructional practice and how we align to careers and competencies is the same. So we've taken that approach, gone all the way down to begin that familiarity so students understand what learning should look like. So when you start to put on the lens of education reform, it's really hard to change things on the back end, right? So you introduce students to this project-based learning or problem-based learning. Whoa, it's weird, it's new. I know when I was a teacher, a lot of my quote-unquote AP students would be, whoa, what is this? It's open-ended, there's not one defined question, what do I go back and do? So changing that mindset all the way down to kindergarten is kind of our new approach, which is pretty exciting. When we take a look at our actual approach itself, we kind of have a two-pronged approach, as I like to describe it with my teams, is that we really use what's called an APB approach, which is kind of a fun acronym. We started off with that in this conversation. We start with activities, and then we move into projects, and then we move into problems. So what we found, it's really the scaffold of tying all these things together that creates that purposeful learning experience. So regardless what the content is, if it's biomed, if it's computer science, if it's one of the engineering courses, this approach works to that. We've actually, as I said, we're a learning organization. For the last year, we've actually been playing around with non-STEM content and actually doing some things with that. Not a public release, nothing that's out there yet, but really applying this approach to different things. So we started to do some focus groups. We worked with some folks who have social studies backgrounds, English backgrounds. Would this approach work in their context? And we've actually found that it does, which is interesting. The next thing we look at is what we call our competency framework. So these two things kind of lay over the top of each other. When we look at our competency frameworks, I'll step back and take a look at our APB approach. It really pretty much describes what Heidi did her intro of. She could have sent me that intro. She could have done our intro first, and I wanted to put the slide in here. I apologize. But if you take a look on the left, and one thing when I ever put up this infographic, and even when I talk with new team members about our approach, I was like, oh, I get it. It's a recipe. So I need 3 activities, a project, and then a problem. No, it's just an infographic to show scale. Okay? And when we take a look at the activities, that's really where that knowledge and skill acquisition occurs. Because it's important. Kids need to go ahead and dive into what is the context that we're learning. We have to do some actual skill building there. Then we have to give them place to go ahead and apply that learning from what they've learned, as well as from other contexts that could come from other core subject areas. And then we end it with a large open problem. And what's interesting about it is that we do set that problem up first. So if we happen to look at this from a lesson or unit perspective, we always lead in with what the problem is to make sure students understand why they're doing what they're doing, because that's important. I know even from my work environment, the CEO tells me to do something, the first thing I go is, why? What is this about? What are we leading to? Which really goes into those competencies as well and preparing them for careers. I won't go through these definitions. One thing that I did want to share is that link on the bottom, which everyone has this PowerPoint, I believe, right? Hopefully. Yeah. We actually have what we call a 3-workshop series that walks teachers through our instructional approach and how to actually transform classrooms using it. The workshop was created in our partnership with Advanced Placement, so I'm not sure how many people are familiar with PLTW and Advanced Placement, but we actually have a partnership together, and we have actual credentials that kids can take our courses and their courses and the kids can earn. And we wanted to really have a conversation about how do you get the PLTW engineering teacher talking to the AP physics teacher, and how do you get the biomed teacher talking to the AP bio teacher. So we created a series of workshops that allow them to come together and understand how they can weave the instructional approach and keep consistency between AP as well as PLTW, because we all know AP provides kind of their framework, but they don't provide actual curriculum. So a lot of our teachers create their own curriculum on the AP side. So our workshops allow them to go ahead and do that in synergy or in parallel with our PLTW teachers. So the link that's in the PowerPoint is one of the directors that works for me talking about our approach. If you're interested in the actual workshop, they are synchronous workshops. We do them in person as well. We're trying to do a few that are online. Feel free to shoot me an email, and we could set that up for you at no charge. I'm always interested in expanding knowledge, if that makes sense, and growing and learning together. So that's just a quick overview of that. The video is 15 minutes. We'll play that now. Just joking. We won't do that. In the video, it does go through the definition of an activity, project, and problem, but I think Heidi summed it up really well, and I think the infographic kind of highlights that as well. The other thing that we kind of talked about in our 2-pronged approach. All right, so if you take a look at that handout I just gave you, you'll notice that we have 3 main competencies. We call them C1, C2, and C3, very original names, I know. So if you take a look at your C1 competency, it's problem solving and critical thinking. And really that competency goes through all of our courses. And really when we look at course development, C1 and C3 are found in everything we do, from pre-K through 12th grade. And what makes each individual course special is the C2. So that is the domain-specific competency. So if it was a digital electronics course, it's actual knowledge and skills and acquisition and things like that related to digital electronics. So when you take this from the context of STEM and outside of STEM, our approach and our belief is that really what you're going to be changing are the C2s. The C1s and the C3s, we believe, are really tied to transportable skills and knowledge sets that are really understood by kind of the career space. So when we started to have the conversation with lots of partners, for those of you that are familiar with PLTW, we look at this as partnerships across the board, partnerships with school districts, partnerships with industry, and education institutions such as post-secondary. When we started having those conversations, what we really found was that industry wasn't totally looking for someone to walk in that could run the lathe or understand thermodynamics at the level they needed to go ahead and perform in that industry context. What they really started describing was that they wanted students that could come in and really had a lifelong learning approach, understood how to work in teams, understood how to problem solve, and that's really what you'll find in our C1 and our C3 competencies. So those are directly tied to employability and what companies were looking for. What we found from a lot of the industries were that they were able to go ahead and once they got those lifelong learners in the door, they could go ahead and grow them to the specific job that they were looking to do, and then they would grow within that job. And that's just kind of an overview of those competencies. I know I'm going kind of quick here, but it's a ton of information. We have an hour. What I would recommend is go ahead and take a look at that handout. If you have questions about that, we can talk after the panel, as well as I think other questions will come up through the panel that I'll reference, as well as the link in the PowerPoint will kind of provide you to the APB approach. But really, that's our take on this from an instructional perspective, is really starting young, making sure it's consistent throughout for the experience, as well as looking at that approach that's more scaffold than open-ended, making sure there's always meaning to making. The big no-no in our world is random acts of STEM or random acts of education. We are not big fans of that. Everything needs to be purposeful, and things need to make sure they're just purposeful. I'll pass it on to Matthew.
Before you do, Brian, well, we'll
Yeah.
let Matt can use the clicker in the meantime.
Definitely.
Would you just say a little bit about your competencies framework, and particularly sort of what skills, I guess, if we understand, I think
Yeah.
Project Lead, people know you as the STEM folks.
You do know us
But
as
I also
STEM
think
folks.
there's the other sets of skills that you're focused on inside of even those projects.
Definitely. If you take a look at the handout, I've gone ahead and cut out an example. Didn't come out too beautifully in the handout in the black and white printer. But if you look at the example there, you'll actually see the knowledge and skills associated to those C1s and C3s. And those are more what some people may typically call kind of soft skills orientated. So teamwork, communication, how to define, understanding the repetition of design where it's just not one shot and then move on. So those things are actually laid out there as knowledge and skills. When we create the actual student experience, we layer those knowledge and skills in with those domain-specific knowledge and skills, which could be more STEM-related as traditional PLTW courses.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm not an organization as PLTW, but I am a school, or I'm a part of a school in a community in Denver. We are a very young school. This is our third year, and so I'll kind of walk you through where we've come from and how we got to where we're at. So we are a small urban school in a very large district of Denver, the city of Denver, and we're one of almost 150 schools in DPS serving the community there. And so kind of give you an idea of where we came from and allow you guys to kind of see how we came to where we are. So our school was founded 3.5 years ago as part of the design team, working with the Carnegie Foundation to kind of help reshape the educational landscape, starting with providing a framework that we use to design the school from the beginning. And so this came to us through the Carnegie Corporation and a partnership with Spring Point in New York as well. And it was really kind of helping us focus on how can we change the education system or education for high school in a competency-based environment and our current state of education, focusing and valuing things like personalized learning, but also development of character skills, or even providing a mastery-based continuum for kids to learn and demonstrate themselves across. So that's kind of where we started. And then we started thinking about, how can this be our dream school? How can we continue building out this dream school for Colorado? And that kind of led us down, to our vision. We want to make sure that our school was empowering all learners to shape their dream and create a better world. And to do that, we had to look further at how can we create students to do that could live that out. And so it started with Tony Wagner has a book called Creating Innovators. And he really examines the ecosystem in which 18 to 26-year-olds that are being very successful in our communities, in our society, and identifying what is in this ecosystem that allows these students or these young adults to be successful. And he kind of coins that as creating innovators, and that's his book. And he looked at this ecosystem. And what it was a matter of allowing students to connect passion, play, and purpose. And more importantly, allow kids to explore and engage in some of the highest need areas in terms of STEM and social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship itself. And so that led us to think about what are those skills we want to start supporting our students in developing to become innovators, leading us to our qualities of an innovator. And so we still have personal academics and excellence, as you would kind of expect to see in your core academics, but then it's the other aspects that we wanted to continue highlighting, including life learning and citizenship, innovative thinking and action, and then finally, transformative leadership. And it kind of goes almost in a Z kind of pattern where we really want to start the foundation around personal academics and develop the character traits that lead to creating those leaders of tomorrow to go out and create the change that they want to see. And so another view about how we measure these and what were our competencies, if you will, for our school. We have 16 competencies that we support our students in developing and measuring against. As you would expect, our core academics, we utilize a lot of the state standards. We use Common Core, NGSS, C3, as a lot of you guys may have here. But I think a big component that is unique to, or at least to sister schools of ours, is that we're also measuring those on a master-based continuum. Some of you guys might be familiar with Summit Public Schools out of the Bay Area and their Cox Skills rubric. And so that allowed us to assess students across 36 skills in all the contexts and in terms of all the content areas to support the skill development across multiple contexts. And then you can kind of see the rest of them are kind of the ones we talk a lot about and wanting to infuse in our schools and continue to support development of, such as things as habits of mind, habits of success, to generating solutions and designing with empathy. These are huge parts of, I think, when we think about creating innovators or creating tomorrow's learners, that they are practicing and have an opportunity to get feedback and develop these core competencies. One of the things that we were also mindful of as we kind of created and looking at the landscape of Denver or Colorado in general is looking at the competency-based approach needing to also support where graduation requirements are going to go to. And so Denver or Colorado is moving to a competency-based approach to graduation requirements. And so how our school model will continue to do that and why we chose project-based learning as our modality or our instructional practice is to allow for students to have opportunities to demonstrate their core academics or their core knowledge needed to go beyond high school. And so some examples, students could use a portfolio as a part of their graduation requirements, or they could use any menu option there to demonstrate proficiency on a more competency-based approach. I'm going to kind of go through how we're also trying to, I'm kind of deviating a little bit away from PBL, but I do want to highlight the fact that our school was designed also to support students' opportunities to access high-value learning opportunities and really focusing on a core of strong academics in our 9th and 10th that allow to support students going on to programs like the working with CareerWise and the Career Residency Youth Apprenticeship Program, to continuing a core academics focused on project-based learning and AP, and really kind of still emphasizing the opportunity for kids and extending opportunities. One thing that's unique to us is that we only have we have a limited course offerings, and we really primarily focus on that STEM and social entrepreneurship paths. And so in terms of our course offerings, our only electives, for example, for 9th grade, every 9th grader will take engineering, PLTW's principles of engineering, introduction to engineering design, and they will all take a social entrepreneurship class in business and starting to give them the foundations for those job sectors, all through a project-based approach. And we chose those two specific courses also because they lend itself very well to looking at cross-curricular PBL planning. One of the things I did allude to earlier was talking about the 36 cog skills. So when we were building out projects, every project in the school is assessing students on this same rubric. And so these 36 skills are used in every content area, and they kind of allow us to give assessment on how students are doing for these specific skills across multiple contexts, and using the projects to assess that and develop those skills. So when you think about providing opportunities for kids to practice the skills in different contexts, but have a common language and vernacular for the students and staff to utilize as they assess themselves across that. We kind of alluded to Buck Institute, a practice or approach, thinking about the products or the end in mind, and then utilizing checkpoints along the way that are formatively assessing students along these same skills. We're pretty fortunate to include how are we bringing in real-world experiences and opportunities through PBL, but also high-value learning opportunities, as well as intentionally teaching students their career opportunities. But really looking at how are we bringing industry partners into our classrooms. And a great example, working with PLTW on this, is a hydrogen project. They did a fuel cells project through PLTW, but we wanted to expand that beyond. And so working with the National Renewable Energy Lab to really bring that problem, or to address why is hydrogen not a current sustainable use of our fuel for cars right now. And students really get to kind of see the real life connection and work alongside NREL researchers to try to address and identify what the problem is, and continue building towards finding a solution. And just so continue looking for opportunities to leverage our industry partners as a critical part of our projects. That's it.
Before we go on, I'll give you a chance to get your clickerness ready, the trigger finger ready. In a couple different places, you use the term lifelong citizenship, lifelong learning and citizenship. Then I heard you talk about the array of competencies and the Cox skills, and practicing local and global social responsibility and social entrepreneurship. So, at least in my head, at least 3 different versions of, or at least words for, some version of character or civic engagement. And one of the things we're seeing around the country, first of all, lots of folks are engaged in this, but use different words for, right? So we have social emotional learning, we have people using the word mindfulness, we have folks saying character ed, civic engagement, personal responsibility, self-advocacy, social responsibility. So let's leave aside what we call it for a minute, and I just wonder if you can talk about, you seem to be particularly deliberate about that area of work, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about why and how.
It kind of goes back to when we talk about transferable skills and thinking about how students can continue to develop those skills. If we aren't intentional about providing a venue for them to learn them and teach them, as well as practice them and get feedback, and if we're not intentionally planning for those throughout our regular curriculum or planning, they're not going to get developed. And so for us to ensure that we have that as part of our school model and bringing that to the front as a competency or multiple competencies that we want to assess students around allows for that.
That's great, thank you. Chattanooga.
Chattanooga, all right. Imagine it being April 2012, and assistant superintendent of a 50,000 student district walks you through a blank warehouse with holes in the walls and tells you, this is going to be the most innovative school in the South. And you're looking around going, okay. And we're going to do project-based learning, PBL stuff, and we're just looking for the right person to lead it. And you meet the superintendent, and they ask you, how innovative are you? And you say, to a fault. And next thing you know, you're getting offered a job. And you're pretty much sure you're probably one of the only candidates for the job. And then it's...
So if you don't get offered the job, then you're really in trouble.
That's really in trouble. Then it's July 2012, and it's the first day on your job, 6 weeks before students are to arrive. You don't have any teachers yet, and you, the night before your first meeting with about 10 district folk, you Google project-based learning, PBL, and an hour and a half later, you're like, all right, I think I know enough to maybe go into that meeting. And you go in the meeting and you ask your first question, you say, you know, I was looking at PBL, and did you want project-based learning or problem-based learning? And there's quiet in the room, and 10 seconds later, one of the assistant superintendents over curriculum says that. And you realize your hour and a half search the night before made you the most knowledgeable person in the room. Welcome to my beginnings at STEM School Chattanooga. All right, so I know this is focused on performance tasks, but I do need to say that one thing that we got accomplished in 6 weeks prior to the students arriving was a mission statement. And what we realized after we spent some time working with business and industry and higher ed is that I'd been a principal for 10 years prior to going there. In traditional settings, I don't know. I'd written countless mission statements and school improvement plans, right? We all have. And I'm pretty sure a lot of them went to somewhere in my office that I never looked at. And we thought, all right, we've got to create one that we don't want people to be able to just say, oh, I'm going to repeat this. We wanted to really focus on process. And what came out of those first 6 weeks was we wanted to focus on process. So there's a couple bolded items there: innovation, think critically, and collaborate. And I'm going to spend my time focused on those. Those are process skills. A lot of mission statements talk about all children being lifelong learners. All children are going to succeed. We focused on process. And these are our tenets. And what we came across as we began focusing on collaboration, critical thinking, and innovation in particular was that after our first 2 years, we were expecting this, and we were doing a lot of performance tasks, and we did a lot of PBL work, but we didn't actually specifically plan for how kids were going to learn these pieces. And what it came down to was we really had to define what these things meant. And if you think about it, a parent comes to your school and they say to you, what's my kid going to learn at your school? And the first thing you pull out is a 4-year plan showing them content. And we had made a decision, process was going to be number 1 at our school and content number 2. Not content number 85, but number 2. We felt like this was the way to transform education with students and transform teaching practices, student practices, parent practices. This was the way to go about doing it. And so what we did was we began, after our first 2 years, really looking at what particular skills kids needed per grade level to move up in a process skill. So for instance, in innovation, we really found as 9th graders, they came to us and they were like, you tell us what to do and we'll do that. Maybe, but we'll do that. This idea of bringing originality into their work was foreign to them. They sat in classrooms where they're like, no, the teacher does the work, tells us exactly what to do, and we give that back to you. The originality in the work is not something we're expected. So we focus a lot in that area in 9th grade. And then in innovation, this idea, they think failure is an endpoint. So in 10th grade, there's a lot of focus on the iterative process. We actually set up a lot of our projects to fail, so they have to go through and redesign these pieces. And as you can see, there's a 4-year plan for this. And we have a nice fancy thing when we walk into our school that sees it and lays it out. But when we talk to parents, what makes our school different? It's that we're process focused. And then there's the yearly instruction. You can't just say we're going to do originality in 9th grade. How are you kids going to learn it? So I'm going to pick one of these in here. I'm going to use 10th grade accountability. So for instance, our 10th grade team, they will work on our project-based teams and they will model. They will lead the team in the first quarter. They will become a participant on the team and there will be a student leader in the second quarter. And kids make contracts. What you going to do when somebody doesn't pull their end? What's the intervention that's going to happen? How are you going to make decisions when you disagree before you get to the point of disagreeing? And we'll go to monitor. That's where they're releasing the team. And now the team is reporting out. To release, the team is independent. It's about helping kids through that process of learning that actual skill at that particular grade level. So it also had to be combined with an understanding of kids don't understand how to apply content. They think of school as mutually exclusive silos of learning. I go to math at 9 o'clock. I go to English at 10 o'clock. I go to history at 11 o'clock. Those things will never touch each other. So in 9th grade, we focus on in-house created PBLs. And I got my website down at the bottom. We post all our PBLs, all the unit plans, all the information that goes, so anybody in the entire world can go in and see what our kids are doing. They're in-house. They have 5 content areas, the 4 core and art. Our STEAM man over there, got our art included as part of our project-based learning and problem-based learning cross-curricular pieces we do in 9th grade. And in 10th grade, we build it with a business partner. We find a partner that says this matters to us, and all the 10th graders work around a project that that partner works with us. For instance, we have a Unum, it's a big healthcare industry partner, and they are really into programming and coding and want to see kids learn about computational thinking, computer science. So we build it around, our kids build an app for that project that they build, and they have certain criteria they do for all of their core courses. There's public accountability in that. By 11th grade, we switch from a content focus to a process focus because our kids will say, I now understand why learning content is important. I get it. You drilled that into my head. But guess what? I don't need a linear graph to do this. I need an exponential function graph to do this when I'm presenting. Let me control the content. And if you go to our website, that STEM 3 Fab link, you will find you'll find over 30 different projects that kids pick from where they are applying content, but they are assessed on process. And there are rubrics to go along that assessment. And in 12th grade, we're done defining the problem. We heard a lot from industry. We are sick of kids just learning how to solve problems. We need kids who can identify problems. And that resonated with me because I do have an engineering background, and I can remember my first day on my engineering job, I went in, met with my manager, and my manager said, hey, you're got a building 10 down there, look at their processes, go. And I remember sitting there going, go do what? And he's like, go do what we hired you to do. And what I realized was I had to go identify issues that we can make more efficient within that process. And then I had to talk and collaborate and work with others to figure out things I did not know. And I had to research things. So all those process skills that we had talked about. So that's basically our performance tasks. They're built in that structure. And in terms of specific things we look at in our rubrics, all of that is posted on our website online, and you can see everything that we do.
Great. Thank you very much. What I'd like to do is see if there are any questions from the group while I also ask one of our colleagues from South Korea to come up, because I'm going to ask FCN to share a little bit about what this looks like in the international space and so how this resonated. While they're joining us, any questions from the audience? Does this resonate? Al?
Okay, so you were talking about the emphasis on process skills, which I think is phenomenal. The question that I have is how do you leverage or how do you balance the accountability measures that teachers, are obviously going to be held, the standards that they're held accountable to, when that's, and if I misunderstood what you're saying, please correct me, but how do you balance that tension that exists from the teachers that, obviously have to fulfill their requirements and make sure that students have the content knowledge, but the focus seems to be more on kind of process skills and PBL and such?
No, that's great. So what we do is we've gone in and we do a standards-based grading, right? So what we have is every single one of our courses has a certain number of learning targets that you must show evidence that you've mastered. In the individual class, let's say Algebra 2, right? That teacher is assessing you all year through those teaching, instructing, assessing you all year. But you also have some of those that are applied throughout the year in cross-curricular projects, right? So in the cross-curricular projects, it's like double dipping. You're not only getting an individual assessment in your class, you're getting a group assessment on that content area target. Plus, we can make our focus of those cross-curricular projects the process piece. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, so we haven't said content's not important, but we've said we're going to make specific efforts to do it. The unique part has been that, and this is going to sound odd, our humanities teachers resonated with this first. It became easier for them to implement process pieces also within their classrooms than it did the math and science teachers. The math and science teachers, it took them longer to resonate with how to embed also process pieces within their classroom instruction.
That doesn't totally surprise me, though, Tony, in that if I look at literacy standards, language arts standards, they have laid out communication and collaboration more explicitly, right? So it makes sense that these folks, I wouldn't say that means they're as deliberate about it as we would like, but the language is in there as part of the expectation and the work, and so that makes sense to me. Just as a flashback to the activity folks just did when you were, experiencing life as a student, and I know some folks were in the same session as I was, part of our conversation was what would it look like if, in addition to the content driving instruction and the lesson planning, if some of these skills were, right? If we set as an expectation that as a school or as a content area, as a grade level or across grade levels, we are planned to be developing students' communication skills, and we define what those look like at different grade levels. Or we are explicit about our expectation that we are trying to develop good citizens, folks who can work on teams, folks who can be in diverse cultures and communities. And so one of the things I love about this panel is each of you is building that into the front end, that it's not something you just hope happens. And I think that's a different thing, is are we designing for those process skills, competencies, transferables, whatever you want to call them. Well, I got another question? Let's go ahead, I'm sorry.
I guess it's more of a comment for just having spent 2 days listening to a wide variety of fantastic things that are going on. But it's the first time, Matt, that I've seen reference to kind of local and global responsibility, that kind of service side of things. And coming from an IB school in Switzerland, service, community service action leadership is a huge part of our curriculum. It's actually part of our high school graduation requirement. And I'm just wondering whether maybe you only pick up a quick perspective, right? And I'm just wondering whether schools are missing a trick. The fact that actually with community action service projects, that is project-based learning. That I just put a couple of notes down. They are real-world experiences. For example, I've got 15 grade 8 students who are liaising with car companies across Europe to try and get them to sponsor replacement vehicles for an organization we work with in Bulgaria. But they're also then raising money and funds for that. And all of those 21st century skills of collaboration and critical thinking are all inbuilt within that. And it's just a comment, or I guess it's a question, how much of that is taking part in high schools in the US, and should there be a greater emphasis on that? I don't know.
So I think the first part of it is, yes, there's some version of service learning happening in lots of schools across the US, but my own experience has generally been there is add-ons. So there are some states and districts that have created service learning requirements as part of a graduation, which generally means X numbers of community service or Y special project at the very end of a high school experience. I think what we're talking about here is where that commitment to community and sort of social good, if you will, is built in more deliberately throughout. And I think in all of these cases, you're talking about really interdisciplinary learning. And I would always challenge folks when we say we've got either tasks or instruction that already has collaboration built in or already has collaboration built in, how deliberately is it built in, right? And as an actual learning goal, which is different than having students working together or having students talk, right? And so we were in I thought a great lesson earlier where, yes, students are participating in pair share, but is that the same thing as developing authentic communication tasks similar to the workspace? And I think you could say the same things about service learning and some tasks around serving your community and the authenticity piece. I wonder if one of you want to talk about how you define authenticity. I know there are lots of ways in the project-based learning space and performance task space that folks define it. Authentic to whom?
Well, I think I can address both.
Oh, well,
So I'll give you
twofer, I love that.
Twofer, so I'll give you examples. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive, service authenticity from the projects, right? So for instance, our 10th graders, so there's a local museum called the Creative Discovery Museum. Their goal is to reach as many young children as possible with STEM work. Our kids build lessons that they take out to elementary schools as part of one of their cross-curricular projects. 10th graders taught over 2,000 kids, and I got 70 10th graders, over 2,000 elementary students STEM lessons. So there's a service aspect to that. But then our 11th graders, there's an automated hydroponics farm that somebody is starting in Chattanooga, and he's looking for how to design the farm. But the farm is going to feed several people that don't have access to food, right? But our kids are working on the design of the farm to make sure that it works properly and efficiently. So I think both of those are very authentic to kids. They're meaningful, right? They're meaningful to the other person or group, CDM, the elementary schools, the hydroponics farm, who they're feeding, which brings back to service. So I think those are tied together.
I just want to add too, like it's also the skill of practicing empathy, and when you think about authenticity and your audience and understanding your community and practicing that skill, and that can be embedded into collaboration. I mean, it can be embedded everywhere, and so being intentional about calling that out and providing the opportunity in the space for kids to practice empathy in itself leads to the service component, because I think in order to actually do good, you have to understand who you're doing it for and why, right? And that is part of practicing the empathy. And so designing with empathy can be transferable across any context, but then also the social justice, leading for that change that you want to see. And so being very, that service isn't about doing something, it could be through leading about, through something too.
Well, and it's also, the authenticity piece ends up being in the product, the work product here too, which is really great. And when we talked about those principles of effective PBL, one of them being public product, again, we generally think about it as, oh, we'll do a fair or a brochure, or in this case, it's, I built a farm. You don't get more public than this kind of a space. And so really thinking differently about what public product means, that even that becomes more authentic, right? What would the real kind of exhibition of one's learning be in the world of work and in one's community? Got a question?
I have a question around professional development for teachers, and you're all growing schools and learning a lot probably in the process. What would you say? What feedback are you giving your teachers as they're assessing these projects? Right, so it's messy, right? The classroom should be messy. And then you probably have varying degrees of engagement, right? You have your reluctant participants and then your stars, right, that are doing tons of the work. How are teachers using rubrics for performance-based, learning activities? What are they looking for as they circulate the classroom, and how do students know that? Does that make sense?
I think for us, it's having a common rubric that you can assess, and for us, it's our COG skills. 36 skills that are going to be utilized and assessed to assess projects and the specific skills. And you can go into more in depth about that, about what each of those skills are assessing. And they're, the Common Core, they bring out a lot of the Common Core, C3 and NGSS, but and trying to keep a common language and grading scale, for lack of a better word, rubric for students to assess and self-evaluate themselves across. But then also allows teachers to, more importantly, you kind of alluded to, or started talking about professional development. It's like that's where PLCs are even more critical, and actually doing project tuning as a PLC that is interdisciplinary, that allow for teachers to reflect on how are you assessing critical thinking, or how are you assessing selection of evidence, calling out specific COG skills that allow us to do a quality check for our projects, and then in the same time spark the learning for the teachers in those environments. We continue to run year-long professional development units. That's what we're really trying to tackle, is how are we providing high-quality projects that we can consistently assess or use interdisciplinary across the school. But I think it does start with having that common rubric. I think that's been very, very powerful. You can ask any student, what is a COG skill, or what are you being assessed on? And how do you know what to do next? I think that's the biggest piece, and that's what the power of the rubric allows for teachers and students to do, is actually leverage next steps. It's great getting feedback, you're doing this well, but the power is, how are you going to continue improving, and having a consistent rubric allows for that. And then providing students the opportunity to revise, go back, relearn if they need to, before you finally give that summative assessment. So I think those are some key parts to how we're continuing to develop teachers' capacity to understand that. And then lastly, it's really important to be bringing in the industries, bringing in partners, whether they're, it could be a parent. Bring outside audiences to give perspective and allow for students to and teachers to collaborate with more than just their isolated groups.
Can I hit something on that?
No, of course, no. Please, Tony.
As I said, I'm a former engineer. I guess I practicing educational engineer. So we learned a process called just-in-time. And the process of just-in-time is it's about setting people up to get their needs met when they need their needs met, right? So a process, where does a process need help in making more efficient, more effective? So we use the same philosophy when we do professional development with teachers. You will never come to my school and see a faculty meeting. You'll never come to my school and see set times for teacher teams to meet. What we do, because if you have a teacher team time to meet and I set it, it means there's people coming to that meeting that don't need to be there. There's only maybe one or two people come to that meeting and say, oh, this was the exact right time that I needed this. So in order to do a just-in-time process to meet the needs of the people, it has to be task-oriented. So what we do is we do professional development by tasks. So for instance, if I was going to require rubrics on an English 9 project, right? There would be a submission time that we would agree with the teachers on when the rubrics come in. There would be a submission process of how they were evaluated. They would be redone until they reached what we call an advanced level. And we did this originally with teachers with a curriculum unit, for instance. We had to go through a process. We had a due date. Half the teachers didn't meet the due date. We did it the second round, 75% met the due date. But even after the second round, none of them had hit an advanced curriculum unit plan. We had small group meetings, we had individual meetings until we got every curriculum unit plan to the advanced level. What the teachers found was not only how to write a really great curriculum unit, they also learned what it takes to do really high quality work, and it also changed their expectation of how they do that with students, right? Because they just realized, I complained about my kids not getting stuff in on time. Half of us didn't. Even the half of us that did completed it, but not at the level that it needed to be done. So task plus just-in-time learning, that's our process for professional development at our school.
Interesting approach. I think another good, important takeaway here is not all of your teachers are engineers by training.
No.
That I think often folks think only engineers can do this. Brian, last word on that part of it. I wonder if you'd say a little bit about the instructional designer mindset. So how do you, if not everybody's an engineer before they start this, what does it mean to develop that instructional designer mindset? I think that's the term you use. Am I close?
It is a term we use. It's kind of a new term. What we've realized is that not every teacher is an instructional designer, which is kind of a crazy aha
Shocking.
moment. And when teachers are hired, they're typically given a course, and maybe that's it. And they have to go ahead and define their own learning objectives and find their own content. What we found organically through PLTW is that teachers were taking our content and morphing it into their own subject areas, so possibly physics or moving it outside of the STEM world, specifically as an elective. So over the last 2 to 3 years, we have been stepping back and looking at how do we teach the teachers to make sure they're actually doing purposeful instructional design. And that's really the key there, is really that scaffold and make sure they understand it. Everything's intentional, nothing is random. I think a big important thing too is that, we talk about it a lot internally as really job embedded and relevant learning to what they're doing, which I think hits on what you'd mentioned is it's, they had to do this task because it's real, it's relevant to their students, to them, and we dug in and we owned it. And that's really how we look at our professional development as well. Over the last 2 years, we've actually launched an online professional development where teachers go through weekly 2-hour meetings with an actual kind of expert and a group of their peers from across the country and learn a course that way. So it's a little different than them creating their own course. We provide the content, but through that PLC and through that teacher leadership, we're empowering them to kind of own that and then transfer that kind of skill of instructional design to other courses is how we look at it. But it's definitely a skill that I think a lot of people feel that everyone has, and it was kind of this interesting you just don't randomly put stuff together. So we do have workshops on that. I feel like a sales pitch guy, but that's kind of what we do as an organization. We provide professional development for schools, for teachers, and it's a little bit different than other providers where in order to teach one of our curricular courses, you have to go through roughly 40 to 80 hours of professional development that hits on course content as well as pedagogical approach.
FCN, does any of this sound familiar to you from a South Korean perspective? You can come on up. So I know it starts to sound very similar. We wonder how that compares or contrasts with your experience.
My name is Chan Pil-jung. I'm the founder of the organization Future Class Network in South Korea. There's the slogan of my organization. When people were concerned about the crisis of education, we decided to just create hope. The concerning is not problem solving.
That's right.
Problem solving is the way to change the making hope. And in 2013, I was a documentary director, documentary filmmaker, and I had the chance to take part in a conference focusing on 21st century education innovation. And I came to realize that there had been already the concept of 21st century education for the first time. And to make the real change in education, the 21st century education need to focus on 21st century skills, they said. Okay, let's see. Oh my God. It's wrong. Okay, and they said, to do it, we need to change the pedagogy from content-based learning to kind of PBL like that. However, I wonder if you can, that kind of education in the current school system with current student like this. You know, in Korea,
They look just like our students.
yeah, I felt like more than 50% or even 70% of students was struggling in the classroom. How can we do that kind of project-based or problem-based learning? Even teachers never trained that kind of things. So I decided to make the film like this. I thought we need to wake up the student in the classroom before implement the project-based learning kind of thing. So I had made 3 episodes of film under the main title of looking for the future classroom, and I implemented the method of 거꾸로 교실. We call it 거꾸로 교실, mainly inspired by the concept of flipped learning. So we want to make a collaborative peer learning environment in the current classroom. So it worked. Simply, it worked. You know, those are the same kids. Those are the same kids who was slept in the classroom. But by just implementing the flipped class method, they woke up in the classroom and engaged themselves. Okay. Let's see. What's going on? Oh. And next year, I want to disseminate this method to all around the country. So the next project name, the name of the next project is the magic of 1,000 classrooms. And I made a teacher training program with the experience of the teachers who made these changes in their own classrooms, and trained around 200 teachers. And let's see, okay, and within just 3 years, those concepts spread all over the country, and it exceeded 16,000 teachers changed their method in the classroom in Korea, and I can observe the students communicate, especially communication skills, developed very fast way, very rapidly. So I made this kind of approach. We called it two-step approach, from flipped classroom to the project-based learning. We called it the world's biggest class project. So let's see the clips. Can you volume up? The concept of the project is the problem-solving project by student with anything they have, any kind of resource they can use, including the subject. So
by the way, a great example of service project that is not separate from their authentic experience at the school.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good example there.
those projects were led by a mathematics teacher and English teacher, and this is a elementary school student on 4th grade. So we found it works even with the lower grade of elementary school student, and this year more than 30 teachers and around 70 projects are on the progress, right? So, and with this experience, we implemented another experiment, efficient learning lab, that's the school. We thought that what if we gather this innovative way of education and with the most innovative teachers together, if they make a school, what happened? That's our question. So we try to, we set up this school this March this year with 24 students, and this is the result. More than 70% students were students who struggled in their previous school. So we are thinking that the change of teachers' mindset is the first step to make authentic change in current classroom, current student with current school and curriculum system. That's our lesson.
So if I may stop you there in terms of time, but one, I want to thank you for this. We're all a little teary-eyed. Remember, that's just me. So really appreciate you sharing, Temple. Thank you very much. But I also want to add, too, I think sometimes folks think of designing complex performance tasks or project-based learning as only being for your advanced STEM kids, whoever those are. I love that we have an idea of certain young people as being capable in certain ways. And I think one of the great examples and reminders here is, actually, this works for everyone when done well, and perhaps even greater return on investment for some of our students where traditional methods have not worked for them. This point about it has to be scaffolded. You don't just throw kids into a deep end of a complex task. You don't throw young people into complex kinds of collaboration without having prepped them for that. That's true in anything we do, whether it's project-based learning or not. I was in a district where we were rolling out new Common Core curriculum and even expeditionary learning. And I'll be honest, in an urban system, I had my teachers who couldn't execute the lessons because they didn't feel comfortable sending kids home with books. That was not part of our culture in our classrooms. And that was a learned experience for our teachers who'd sent books home. You only get your readers only so many years. And so they were afraid to ever flip a classroom because we couldn't send textbooks home. We couldn't send textbooks or novels home with young people. And so teaching our teachers how to teach their students that kind of personal responsibility.